There's a topic I did want to talk about today, which is not triggered really by any particular piece of news, but I think it is topical, which is what I'm calling a secular trend in company layoffs. It's been happening for long enough now that companies are conducting layoffs even when business is good. And, I think the economy, we're certainly not out of the woods around, inflation and risks of recession and so on. But I'd say overall, the global economy is doing better. And yet I'm still seeing announcements of layoffs coming from overall healthy companies quite frequently. Amir, what are you seeing? What are your thoughts around the fact that companies just seem to be slimming down and getting more focused on productivity and doing more with fewer people?
So I definitely see it happening. I'm seeing more pressure on the same people. I'm seeing it's called quiet firing, which is
Quiet quitting?
no, quiet firing. You take people and you just give them more and more and more responsibility by making roles redundant and merging them into other roles. So basically, instead of firing people, you don't hire new people and you give new work to the same people that are in the company. I'm seeing all of that, and I'm seeing deep pressure on productivity, and while doing all of that, still firing people. So I think it's definitely being normalized, the fact that all companies will fire people probably all the time, which wasn't the case. When I was at Google, nobody got fired. It was
Nobody got fired.
extremely rare to get fired, and managers didn't even get how to fire training because that was so rare.
But we weren't even really allowed to fire. So, I was a manager at Google. There were people I wanted to fire, and HR effectively prevented me. So it was not just that we didn't get the training, but we were actually, so risk averse that we would rather keep an underperformer around than deal with whatever legal risk there might be around firing them.
Exactly. So I think that's not going to be the path forward.
And why is that? Is it Elon? I know you have direct experience of that. Is it AI? Is it just the end of zero interest rates? Why do we think this is happening now?
The answer is I don't know. I feel that there's been a shift. I feel like in the last 5 years, we were scrambling as an industry to hire people. And it was a very much seller's market. So employees were kings and they could choose any salary that they wanted and be as productive as they wanted and set all the stage. And I think the tides have turned. And I think it could be that one day it will reverse. But right now it's very clear that business is now driving and companies have the upper hand in this equation. It's also for hiring has become a lot more stringy. So people are saying that they're having open roles, but actually not hiring or taking their very, very long time in hiring roles. So I think it's still fighting for the top 1% or 2% is still going to be a seller's market, still going to be an employer market. But for all the rest, the power is going to be in the company's hands.
I think this goes well beyond tech. One of the things that sort of got me thinking about this is just yesterday here in Australia, the major telecom provider announced a layoff of 3,500 people, not in an environment of economic distress, just because they wanted to be more efficient and more competitive. And just triangulating, I've also recently read a book called Slow Productivity by Cal Newport. He was also the guy who wrote Deep Work, which is a big bestseller. He's talked a lot about pseudo-productivity. I know there's another author who called it just bullshit work. This sense that what has happened over the last few decades is that technology has improved a lot. Knowledge work should have created this great new wave of productivity. And I'll come back to productivity, but instead what it's done is generated all of this pseudo work that is not productive. And you can easily end up in a situation where people are busy all day and don't really get much done. And then you hire more and more of those people. And at a certain point, I think the worm has turned and realized, and I do think, as much as I have problems with how Elon Musk does things and whatnot, is, that Twitter, the firing of 75% of the workforce, and the fact that a lot of the predictions of doom didn't eventuate. I know a lot's gone wrong at Twitter, don't get me wrong, but I think there was a sense of oh, okay, there were a lot of people maybe who were not contributing productivity to this. And so the bullish side of me is saying, as unpleasant as this transition is, it could be a really exciting time, because ultimately productivity, it can seem like a dry economic term. The way we all become more prosperous is with increased productivity. That's the only way you can grow GDP, is by being more productive. And so if now we're okay, we're no longer going to tolerate people just sort of having flatlining productivity, despite the availability of all these technologies that should be making them more productive, then we might actually have genuine increases in productivity across society. And ultimately, that will make us all wealthier.
Potentially. There's also a book by Yuval Noah Harari where he talks about potentially having a class that is useless. If you reach a certain productivity and you don't need a lot of employees, what do you create? Like, what's next for that class? It could be that he's totally wrong and Andreessen is right and like new jobs will be created and everybody's rich, but it also could mean a new class system where you have people who are productive and working and are like 10xers and all the rest. And then we go back to the feudal system where like there's people who have and people who have not.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is interesting, and it gets philosophical, and of course, there's, that book, Brave New World, as well, that in a sense talks about that. But, I think there's a few things. Like, first of all, this is not the first time that people have been worried about this happening. When steam engines came into existence, when computers came into existence, all of this stuff is like, oh, okay, increases in productivity means that we will have a lot of useless people and they're going to be on the scrap heap. And that's never happened. I do think this time is different is always a dangerous argument to make because it's wrong until, of course, one day it's right. And I think the question is, is the combination of AI and robotics going to mean that for the first time we have basically non-human actors that can eclipse a certain group of humans in every way, right? That, they're more productive, they're stronger, they're all of these things. That's never been the case before. Now, do we go to a feudal system? The feudal system was a scarcity world, right? If we end up in a world of superabundance, I think it will create a lot of problems, but there'll be different problems, and the question is more like, how do we keep everyone entertained and how do we make sure that we distribute the fruits of our superabundance effectively and stuff like that?
We could do another 2 hours on this. I don't know if
we could.